Hey, thanks for joining me for today's video. About a month ago or so, I posted a video about a battery that packs 300 amp hours of lithium iron phosphate battery capacity into pretty much the smallest footprint available for that kind of capacity. Well, today we're going to take a look at a product that takes the same high density energy footprint, but packs it into a 100 amp hour 12 volt battery. This is the 12 volt 100 amp hour Mini from LiTime. And just look at the difference in size compared to their conventional 100 amp hour battery. So same lithium iron phosphate chemistry, same voltage, same 100 amp hour capacity, but the Mini is using pouch cells instead of prismatic cells. And that, combined with some clever assembly design, helps it achieve a full 35% smaller footprint and also 5 pounds lighter at only 19 pounds versus 23 pounds for the standard 100 amp hour version. So the Mini really does start to open up some more installation options now, especially if you're looking for, something to install this somewhere where you have limited space, which is often the case in any kind of van or RV situation, but could also be quite beneficial in non-mobile applications as well. So it kind of allows you to build a much higher capacity battery bank in a much smaller space. All right, so let's get into the important specs on this battery, and then we'll go see if it actually produces usable capacity numbers in line with its bigger sibling. And also, since I know that some of you out there are probably just getting started and looking into these kinds of power solutions, and maybe you want a little more kind of DIY type information, I'm going to try to quickly discuss and demonstrate a couple of really easy ways that you can get started using a battery like this. So stay tuned for that later in the video if that's something that you're interested in. All right, so starting right off with price. This battery is currently listed for $369.99. Plus they've got a $30 off coupon code that you can apply to it for a limited time, which brings the price down to just under $340 US. And that same deal is also currently available on Amazon US. So being lithium iron phosphate, the Mini is rated to maintain 80% of its original capacity even after 4,000 full charge and discharge cycles at a 100% depth of discharge. And of course, it'll last even longer if you don't charge and discharge it to 100% every time. So the dimensions on this battery are 10¼ inches wide or long and 5¼ inches in this direction here, and just under 9 inches tall. So it is, as I said, 35% smaller than its standard 100 amp hour counterpart. So it has a 100 amp BMS, so it's rated to handle a continuous charge and discharge of 100 amps and a max discharge of up to 250 amps for about 5 seconds. And as you'd expect, it does come with all the usual protections, so over voltage, under voltage, high temp cutoff, overcurrent cutoff, and short circuit protection. Now, given its extremely small footprint, it shouldn't come as a surprise that it does not have low temp protection built in. So if that's something that you're concerned about, you'd want to enclose this in an insulated compartment with maybe a battery heating pad installed if you're expecting sub-freezing temps wherever it is that you're planning to use this thing. So the 100 amp hour Mini is expandable up to a 4P4S configuration with up to 16 batteries in total. That would give you a maximum capacity of just over 20 kilowatt hours. Now, unlike a lot of batteries, you can actually mount this battery in any orientation, including upside down if that for some reason was something that you needed to do. It's got an IP65 weather resistance rating, so it can be used for trolling motor applications, and it does have a 5-year warranty. All right, let's go find out if this thing lives up to the hype. All right, let's do a DC discharge test. Got my newer battery tester here with the extra voltage leads. It's supposed to make it a little bit more accurate. I've got the discharge rate set at 10 amps. Let me go ahead and kick that off, and we will check back when it's done. All right, let's see how we did on the DC discharge capacity test. 1,339 watt hours. That is extremely good for something that's rated for 1,280 watt hours. All right, we are going to resume load testing in just a minute, but I wanted to cover some basics. If you're new to how this whole 12 volt battery thing works, I'm not going to get into super great detail in this next couple of minutes, but I do want to give you some things to think about and maybe some resources to go check out. But to cover some of the things that you might need if you want to get into this sort of thing, and some of the things that you can do to get up and running very quickly with something like this 100 amp hour Mini. So first of all, you probably want to have a 12 volt battery charger, and preferably one, in this case, that is specific to lithium iron phosphate. All right, so this is an example of a 12 volt charger, and this is basically just kind of like charging or jump starting a car. You just attach the alligator clips to the appropriate poles on the battery, and then you plug it in, and it will charge the battery up at the appropriate voltage. It will shut it off when it's supposed to make sure the batteries are at optimal charge and optimal health. So highly recommend a 12-volt charger if you're going to start getting into these battery systems. So we'll put that aside. Now, the next thing that you definitely want to have, it's a very good idea to have, is a basic digital multimeter. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be a $300 fluke. You can get an inexpensive one for 40 or 50 bucks, probably cheaper than that on Amazon. And basically you just want to set it to volts DC. In this case, this has a clamp on it for checking current. That's nice to have. It's not necessarily a need to have, but it is really nice to understand what your battery charge is. So you set it to volts DC, and then to check the voltage, you simply put the black lead on the negative pole and the red lead on the positive pole, and you will get a voltage here. I'm reading 13.31 volts, which is just on the borderline of being full. It's not quite full. Now here's the thing, with lithium iron phosphate, you can use a voltmeter to tell you that it's full, and you can use a voltmeter to tell you that it's basically empty. Basically, when you get down well below, say, 11 volts, these things are essentially empty. You shouldn't really discharge them much below that. What you can't do is if you get an intermediate voltage range like 12.2, for example, that doesn't really tell you with any precision what the actual state of charge is. For that, you need something called a smart shunt that actually measures, and that's what this little guy here is, and we'll talk about how that gets connected before, but that actually measures, once it's calibrated, it measures the amperage in and the amperage out, and it can tell you what with some degree of precision, if it knows what the capacity is, what the actual state of charge is. So that's also kind of recommended, and those kind of run the gamut from cheap ones for in the $20 range to well over $100. That's a Victron. It tends to be a more expensive one. And by the way, in case you're wondering, I'm not sponsored by any of these little pieces and parts. I did buy all of these little items with my own money. Anyway, that aside, some couple quick things that you can do right out of the bat. After the battery is charged up, let's say all you want to do is run a 12-volt refrigerator for either camping, car camping, van, all that sort of thing. This is very easy to do with just a battery and then something like this. This has a nice long cable on it. This particular one has alligator clips, so literally all I have to do is clamp the red to the positive and the black to the negative, and then I've got a 12-volt socket right here that I can plug even a very large 12-volt DC fridge into, and it will power off this no problem and run for a very long time, even without being recharged. It'll run for several days without being recharged. And of course, if you then do a charge controller and you get more complicated, and again, that's beyond the scope of what we're going to get into here, but we are going to talk about how to hook up an AC inverter here in just a minute. The other thing is you can also get these little 12-volt sockets. These things are great. They're very inexpensive, but they're extremely handy. Like I said, this one has the alligator clips. They also come with versions that have little ring terminals on them. So these are going to stay put better than alligator clips, which can get knocked off. But if you just want to be able to snap something on and take it off very quickly, this is your guy right here. And I'll leave links to these in the description below if you want to go check these out. But they do have inline fuses on them as well, which is an important thing to be aware of. You definitely want an inline fuse to protect this cable if something were to go wrong. All right, so let me put that stuff aside. And let's talk about connecting a basic inverter. Now this is a 2,000 watt inverter. Really, with just a single battery, a 1,000 watt inverter would be appropriate. It would probably be the most appropriate matchup because this thing is rated to continuously output up to 1,280 watts, which is more than a 1,000 watt inverter. But you know that the inverter isn't going to overtax the battery in that case. Now in this case, it's a 2,000 watt inverter, and this inverter could overtax this battery. But essentially what you need to know to connect this is your inverter is going to have a red positive terminal and a black negative terminal. Now you do want to always have a fuse on the positive, off the positive terminal of the battery, sitting between the battery and the inverter. Again, you want that fuse to protect the cable that your battery cables here, to make sure that they are not getting more current through them than they can handle, in which case you might cause a fire. So that's just to protect the cable. That's the whole purpose of the fuse. So you size the inverter to the load that you want. And once you know what the load is going to be, in this case, let's pretend this is a 1,000 watt inverter just to keep it simple. And so if you were going to run a 1,000 watt inverter with a single 12 volt 100 amp hour battery, then you need a cable that is capable of handling that 100 amps continuous output from the battery, or more accurately, draw from the 1,000 watt inverter. And there are actually easy calculators online, and I'll put a link to one in the description below if you want to go check it out. But all you need to know is what the source voltage, and that is the battery voltage. So in this case, the source voltage would be 12 volts. And then you need to know what the maximum load is going to be. In this case, it would be 1,000 watts. Again, pretending this is a 1,000 watt inverter. And then that would tell you, based on what your voltage drop and all this other stuff that we're not going to get into in this particular video. But by the way, if you want to get into some of the more details about how to assemble all of this, I will put a link up here if you want to go check that out. All right, let's get the inverter hooked up, and then we'll do some load testing. All right, to make our connections, just so you can see here on the negative side, I do have this smart shunt that I talked about. This gives me a Bluetooth connection, so I can really monitor what's going on with the battery in terms of power in, power out. And we're going to take a look at that actually in the course of this once we do the load testing. Basically, it sits on the between the battery and the load, right? So, and it sits on the negative side. So I have one lead that goes to the battery and one lead that goes to the system. So it just sits right in between there on the negative side. So you can see here, it actually also has a red terminal, a positive terminal here. So that actually just gives power to the smart shunt, and that just connects over here. So what we're going to do is positive lead is clearly marked on the battery over here. These are M8 bolts. I'm going to put that right under the bolt, and I'm just going to tighten that down. All right, and then I'll do the negative side over here. Now, if I did not have a disconnect switch here, one thing that you should be aware of is if you are already connecting this direct, even through a fuse or a breaker, if that breaker is closed, so you have continuity through that breaker, you're going to complete the circuit when you attach this black wire. And if you have it attached to an AC inverter like this, the capacitors in this are going to draw some pretty significant power, and you're going to get a very noticeable spark. So you would definitely want to wear eye protection, and you'd want to be careful when you touch this. Now, I'm not going to get the spark because I have a disconnect switch here, and I'm not actually completing the circuit. So I don't get the spark there when I first touch the lead like you will without a disconnect switch. So if you needed another reason to go get a disconnect switch, maybe that would do it. All right, so I've got this hooked up. You can see I'm getting a blue light there that tells me my Bluetooth is connected. Smart shunt is powered, and we've got our red lead on there. Everything is connected correctly. We're just triple checking everything. And when I go ahead and give it to enable the disconnect switch, you'll hear the inverter just kind of acknowledge that it has now got power. And it's actually got a blinking light on top to confirm that as well. So let's hook up some stuff. All right, in this first test, we're going to see if we can run this Mini at its continuous discharge rate of 100 amps, or 1280 watts. We're actually going to try to exceed that just a little bit and see if this thing will run for at least 15 minutes under that condition. So I've got a couple of oil heaters here on the floor that should run nice and quiet, but we are going to certainly kick on the fans of the AC inverter here just above. So we'll hear that kick on once I start putting this under load. But let me go ahead and start giving this some power. So the first oil heater in low setting will give us a little over 600 watts, as you can see on the Smart Shunt Victron app there. And then I'm going to add another heater. This is going to kick us over that 1280 watts. We're at 1409. I think it'll settle just a little below that, hopefully. But notice the amps. We're actually at 113 amps as well. Let me go ahead and start the timer. We're going to find out if this battery BMS will let us run under this condition for 15 full minutes. So let me start a time lapse and we'll see how it did. All right. As you can see, no problems running this thing for a full 15 minutes at basically 12 to 14% over its rated continuous capacity at discharge at 100 amps. So not only does it output at a very high capacity, significantly exceeding that 1280 watt-hour capacity number in my capacity test, but it is also performing very, very well in load testing. So as you can see, even though you can run it well past its rated 100 amp continuous output, you don't want to do that on a regular basis. I'm only doing that for testing purposes. But this thing did perform like a champ. All right, so I hope you found at least some of that information helpful, and do understand that that little quick flyby on connecting an AC inverter was not intended to be a comprehensive guide, really kind of just a jump start to hopefully give you confidence that with a little bit of online self-education and maybe a commitment to taking care to do things safely, you can absolutely do these things yourself. And so if you did find the video helpful at all, please consider hitting that like button for me. I would really appreciate that. Oh, and if you happen to want to know where I got these 12-volt car socket cables, I'll put Amazon links in the video description below for you so you can find those. They're super inexpensive, and as I said, they're extremely handy if you have either a single 12-volt battery or a 12-volt battery bank. All right, so to wrap up on this LiTime 100 amp hour mini, I do think this is a fantastic little battery, and I think if you're wanting to pack as much power as you can into as small a space as possible, as is typically the case, in a small camper, van, or RV application, starting with something like this might be just the right solution for you, especially when the cost of these things is just over $300. But do keep in mind that while it does have high temp cutoff protection, it does not have low temp protection, as I had previously said. So you'd want to keep it in an insulated space if you are going to be needing to use it in freezing temperatures. Okay, so I think that about wraps it up for this video. If there's anything that I missed, or if you have any lingering questions about the Mini, please feel free to leave those in the comments below, and I'll try my best to respond to those. So thanks for watching, and I do hope you'll join me for the next one. Until then, have fun out there.